Why settle for the rest when you can have the best? That was my middle school class secretary slogan when I was running for office, and it's a quote that I've taken with me into my adult years, despite its slight misgivings. Look, nothing's perfect and there is no objective best. Life is nothing but compromises, big and small. You settle for a longer commute in exchange for affordable rent. Or you trade high-end steak dinners for instant ramen so you can save for that dream vacation. Or maybe you opt for a cheap handheld gaming device, knowing full well that you're going to sacrifice battery life, screen quality, and let's be honest, a piece of your sanity. And when it comes to budget handhelds, compromise isn't just expected, it's the name of the game. You give up features, performance, build quality, sometimes even basic usability, all in pursuit of saving a buck. And here's the thing, behind every compromise, there's engineering decisions being made, sometimes brilliant and sometimes questionable, that bring these devices to life at such low price points. And today, I want to take a look at two handhelds, well, here's one, and two, that I found on AliExpress. Not just to see where they succeed or fail, but to appreciate the effort it takes to make something functional out of very limited resources. These devices may be cheap and, well, frankly very bad, but they're also fascinating in their own right. So, without further ado, let's dive right in. I'm always the most interested in sub $50 handhelds. The more expensive stuff can get so safe and boring. When you restrict R&D budgets, these Tinker Cottage hardware devs really start coming up with some interesting pieces of hardware. Case in point, these two oddities. The X40 Pro and XY09 game player. Not the most imaginative names, but hey, it's the hardware in hand that counts, and, well, the hardware in hand is... oh boy, where to start? Well, let's start with the X40 Pro, the more pedestrian of the two devices. I can't explain why, but for some reason, I was even more disappointed in the device after unboxing it. And this was despite me having thoroughly went over the product page before buying it. It came exactly as advertised, and yet I still kept feeling this sinking feeling in the pit of my stomach. Call it a sixth sense, but it soon proved correct. Though, let's not get ahead of ourselves. For a second, I want to talk about device ergonomics, or the lack thereof. It's just a thin slab of light plastic. Coming in at 350 grams and 18 millimeters in width, it feels almost like nothing in the hands. Yet this simplicity is also its charm. It's the result of cost-saving decisions, where every millimeter of plastic saved shaves a few cents off the final product. Now that weight will be a plus in some people's book, but what detracts from the experience is the slight misbalancing of the device. You can tell that the battery is on the bottom center. It doesn't feel even to hold at all. A fact that wouldn't matter if the machine had its weight distributed better. But weight distribution is far from this device's main issue. I could nitpick this device for its ugly and washed out screen, or for the bizarre port selection, but the main crime here is the ho-hum performance. Now for the most part, everything works as advertised. The ROMs do indeed start when you press play, but the performance leaves a lot to be desired. There's this inconsistent stuttering and sluggish feel to some of the games. It almost feels random at times. Some games will play fine, and then later that exact same game will have this issue. You can feel your inputs not registering as fast as you press them. It felt the worst in the fast-paced arcade stuff. Armored Warriors was nearly unplayable for me with this issue. It also doesn't help that the buttons themselves can misfire inputs. It's very rare now, mind you, but it did happen at least 3 times in my session with this unit. A bizarre occurrence that I figured would be pretty difficult to come about, though this could just be my unit acting up. Another problem you're going to face is the audio. It can get very crunchy and out of sync depending on what's going on screen. I think this is a case of the BIOS or specific core for the emulator they chose not being a great fit for the hardware. With chipsets this old or low end, it's unwise to just set and forget the underlying emulation settings. You need to do more tailoring versus something more high-end that can just brute force everything. Now, this wasn't exactly a glowing review, but even with all these issues, we must remember something. It's what's on the inside that counts. So, let's take the X40 apart and see what all that internal beauty looks like. The device only takes 4 screws to remove, and that's something that I've always appreciated from this sector in the market. Everything is super simple to disassemble. But of course, you still have to fight with the clips before the shell gives way to the internals. Now, you need to be extra careful because some of these cheap handhelds use glue for their components, so you don't want to pull any of these wires out. Then you unclip the screen, and lo and behold, the board is free to be examined. And what a board it is. The first thing that speaks to me is the throwback green on the PCB. I didn't even know companies still use this color for electronics. Very nostalgic. Now on to tax brass. I always like to look for a revision code or a manufacturer's date on the board. As we can see here, our main board was made on October 7th, 2022, which might as well be a lifetime ago for this type of device. I then want to turn your attention to the top left corner. There you can see a chip surrounded by various bits and bobs. This is mystery 1 of 3 for this board, and they get progressively stranger to me as we go along. Now, this chip is one I could find no concrete information about online. I'm sure its datasheet exists somewhere, but it's most likely in Chinese and, well, I don't speak or read Mandarin. Which leaves us with the alternative components surrounding the chip. You see this cylindrical can looking thing? Yeah, this is a system clock crystal or oscillator for the SoC. This device supplies a stable reference frequency that the SoC uses to generate its internal operating clock signals. That fact, paired with the voltage regulators, capacitors, and inductors, lends credence to my theory that this chip is the dedicated audio and video decoder, or it's the microcontroller for managing system states, peripherals, and button inputs. I'm leaning more towards it as a microcontroller for managing the system states, and I'm going to explain more once I get to that portion of the XY teardown. But for now, we're on to mysteries 2 and 3 of this device. Mystery 2. What is this SoC? This giant unmarked chip is clearly the brains of this handheld, but unfortunately I have no idea what it is or how to find out. Whatever it is, it's old for sure. Definitely pre-2014, most likely around 2010. I don't know why companies do this, but I've got a few theories. There's a few possible reasons why a low-end device maker might scratch off or obscure the labels on an SoC. Reason number 1, hiding the actual supplier or specifications. They might not want competitors or us end users to see exactly which chip they're using, especially if they've sourced a lower quality or older part than advertised, which, believe it or not, happens a lot, though I'm sure you can believe this. Reason number 2, protecting their supposed secret sauce. Some manufacturers believe obscuring part numbers makes it harder for others to clone or reverse engineer their designs, which is definitely not true because stuff gets recycled all the time. Then reason number 3, which is what I think it is, avoiding warranty or licensing issues. If the chips are gray market or obtained outside the official distribution channel, the device maker might remove the labels to avoid scrutiny from both chip makers and end customers. That's how you break a lot of NDAs that way. At any rate though, I hate it and I wish they would stop doing this. It's also very unexciting when I finally get one of these things open and it's just a big black square with no identifiers on it. Which finally takes us to mystery number 3. Why is the DRAM package farther away from the SoC than the NAND package? So this might need some explanations, but you see this setup on screen? Yeah, this is PCB design 101. What not to do when designing a device. DRAM must be physically closer to the SoC because it uses high-speed, tightly timed interface, DDR, that is far more sensitive to signal integrity and timing skew than NAND, which, operates at a lower speed and is therefore less sensitive to trace length. So let's put that in simple speak. CPUs of all types need fast access to memory. You want the chip and RAM to be as close as physically possible. This is why you'll see a lot of thinner light laptops have faster RAM speeds versus gaming laptops because of the soldered LPDDR. This design decision just baffles me. I don't know why they did this. So this Nanya chip is a DDR3 SDRAM part. You can tell because of the large part number identifier. Inside that number salad is the telltale sign, 128M. This portion usually indicates a 128 megabyte die per device width. So this chip typically provides a total density of 1 gigabyte of DDR3 when it's organized with 8 bits wide, as this chip is. The other chip is the NAND package. It's a generic 16 gigabit parallel NAND flash chip, and this is what houses the emulators, ROM, OS, etc. If you look at the part number again, you can see a pattern. The 16B08 part means that it's an 8-bit bus and that package is 16 gigabytes. So for some reason, they decided to put the latency sensitive RAM package further away from the CPU that desperately needs fast access to memory. You can clearly tell this device suffers because the operating system is extremely slow. The system is already being neutered because of the insufficient RAM in my opinion, and you go and make that worse by having the very slow eMMC NAND act as a proxy for your RAM. That makes no sense to me. The only thing I can think of was the manufacturer decided to use the NAND as a sort of pseudo RAM. Since this device supports swapping, which is using your storage as RAM, they probably thought they could get away with longer and cheaper traces for the DDR3. Well, they were very wrong. If any of you are watching ever think about becoming hardware engineers, please do not design your handhelds like this. I promise you, you're not saving any money doing this. This device is the one that I had high hopes for. I knew going into this that the X40 was basically a generic, no-name thing meant to pad the shelves of whatever retro shop or dropshipper so happened to stumble across it. But the XY here had some promise. For one, the marketing was actually confident enough to state what SoC that they used, that being the ATM7059. And despite it being older, if they kept true to its strengths, then it wouldn't have been the worst thing ever. Oh, and look here, they actually state how many repeating and non-repeating games they have. Over 22,000 repeating? Yeah, I'll take their word for it, I believe it. All in all, not the worst first impression, especially in your hands. It's another extremely light and hardly grippable plastic toy, coming in at 217 grams and 18.7 millimeters in width. There's obviously no weight or heft whatsoever. It doesn't feel good, but not abysmal either. They tried to go for some sort of comfort contour on the device's rear, but it's not doing anything for me. I have average sized hands, so this is a device that I'll find myself crab clawing to use. Not great, but it could be worse. Powering the unit on sees us faced with a very pleasant surprise. The screen is really good, like shockingly good. I believe it's some sort of recycled OLED panel from a phone. There's no perceptible LCD panel glow or fuzzy spots on the display. Black content renders out in true pixel perfect black. It's a very sharp and presentable image. This is the device's standout feature, and they must have known because the unit is called High Definition Display High Resolution Handheld Game Console. Very creative. Now, a stellar screen is awesome, but that only goes so far for the actual driving performance of the machine. What does an ATM7059 get us? Well, everything is hit or miss from NES to GBA. Things work, but not well. Super Nintendo performance can see slowdowns, which really sucks because the screen is so beautiful. Chrono Trigger exhibits its the worst with all of its advanced Mode 7 shenanigans. This is just baffling to me. SNES performance should be an automatic win, but it's not. Performance is on par and sometimes worse than the X40 Pro, but it's difficult to repeat those scenarios to get like-for-like numbers, which tells me that these boards are probably very similar on the inside. I bought both devices from the same AliExpress seller, so I'm sure they came from the same factory somewhere, but the only way to be sure is to take this baby apart. Again, it's the same deal. 4 Phillips head screws and then plastic clips holding the frame in place. Once it's out, you have to contend with 4 more board screws, but finally it gives way and becomes free. Now, the first thing that I did was remove the screen cable because I just needed to know what sort of panel this was. And would you look at this, a Samsung SMD screen. I checked the part number and this is a 5.3 inch AMOLED panel from 2011. A stellar choice for this device because again, that screen is just stand out. I'm almost sad that this beautiful of a screen got slapped into this kind of machine here. It deserves much better. So moving the screen to the side, we now have our main board. This one was made on October 23rd, 2023. So barely over a year old, not bad. You'll also see a familiar face with our ATT3002 chip. And it's again surrounded by various regulators, inductors, and that telltale clock crystal. In the previous teardown, I said that this was most likely a microcontroller for managing the system states. And the reason I believe this is mainly due to a process of elimination. This board here we know is powered by the ATM7059 chip. That chip supports native video and audio decoding, so we know that this ATT chip isn't doing the grunt for that. With the clock battery and power management circuitry, I'd say it's safe to label this as a microcontroller. Not the most scientific conclusion, but it was the best that I could do. Moving on to the main trio, and I already see some major improvements. One, the SoC is marked, which is great, but more importantly, the DRAM package is the closest chip to the SoC. Now it may look confusing because there are two Samsung packages here, and at first I assumed the furthest one away was just NAND, but upon more research I learned something very interesting. So this NAND package is actually an EMCP chip, which stands for Embedded Multi-Chip Package, meaning it's a hybrid NAND and RAM chip. Think of it as smushing your RAM and SSD together for a hybrid monstrosity. Yeah, so the 2G16 means you have 256 megabytes of DRAM with a 16GB NAND package. Now personally, I don't think that this device is using the DRAM portion of this EMCP chip. I just think they went with this option because it was the cheapest way to get 16 gigs of NAND storage. Like I said, the amount of compromises and design decisions that go into these things is just staggering. You have two extremely similar devices in performance profile, and yet their internal design philosophy was pretty different. Now in practice, does this mean anything to you or any end user? Definitely not. And here's where I want to shift the conversation a little bit. Yes, these devices are flawed. The X40 Pro feels like it's held together by hope and a prayer, and the XY09 doesn't live up to its full potential either. But when you look under the hood, you see something incredible. Engineering ingenuity, or in some cases, the lack thereof. Every choice, whether it's the use of an outdated SoC, a recycled OLED screen, or a lightweight plastic shell, was made with one goal in mind: to make retro handheld as cheap as possible, without having it completely fall apart. I don't consider these just cheap cash grabs. They're the result of small teams trying to stretch their resources to the absolute limit. And while they certainly fall short of delivering a premium experience, they do deliver something else, an affordable gateway into retro gaming that wouldn't exist otherwise. So are these handhelds worth your money? No, of course not. Especially if you're looking for a smooth, frustration-free gaming experience. But they are worth appreciating, like fine art in the Louvre. They represent what's possible when engineering meets extreme budget constraints. And honestly, it's just fun to see where they succeed and where they fall apart. It reminds me of the early days of retro handhelds, where experimentation led to some truly unique devices. So even if these aren't going to replace your Miyoo Mini or RG35XX, they're worth taking a closer look at. Just not as products, but as feats of engineering. Please, just admire from a distance. And that's it for today's video. If you enjoyed these teardowns and you want to see more of the quirks and creativity behind budget devices or other products I review, then please let me know down in the comments below. And remember, sometimes it's not about having the best, but about appreciating what goes into the rest. See you all next time. Ciao. I'm always the most interested in sub $50 How did I say sub $50 Sub $50 handhelds.